Not the easiest of shows to do tonight, but a show we're going to do. I want to open by talking about Mike Leach. Ironically, we spent an inordinate amount of time 48 hours ago on this very show talking about the kind of correlation between football and entertainment, and I had some people argue with me that football coaches aren't entertainers. Well, they absolutely are. They're in the entertainment industry. That doesn't mean they have to do a clown show on the sideline, but they are paid the way they are. They have the spotlight on them the way they are. Those stadiums are as full as they are because this is the entertainment industry. It's not just sports. If it were sports, then it would have the same amount of eyeballs on it as water polo does. It doesn't. There's a reason why football is elevated in our society. It's because it is entertainment. And I talked about Deion Sanders the other night being a football coach, but also an entertainer. We lost a guy just like that last night. His name was Mike Leach. He was the head coach at Mississippi State. Those of us who have followed this sport for a long time have known him for a long time. Ironically, and I've heard a lot of you talk today, people who never met him actually felt like they knew him. Very interesting, because you don't describe everyone in our sport like that. But I'll give you my thoughts since everyone else has given you their thoughts. There's this thing that happens sometimes. You probably have seen this in your social circle, or certainly you've just seen it publicly. You know, sometimes when people who are eccentric or funny by nature become self-aware, sometimes it's the worst thing in the world. It's okay as long as they don't know they're funny, as long as they don't know they're eccentric and a little bit quirky and different, because they're authentic. They don't lose the authenticity, but then all of a sudden, once they realize people are laughing and they realize people like them, all of a sudden they become self-aware and they start putting on an act. They start becoming a caricature of themselves. Here's what I liked about Mike Leach. He actually never did that. He was just the same guy the entirety of the time that we knew him publicly. Some of us were closer or got to have access to him because we cover the sport. You may falsely think that because his personality got elevated with the SEC network, for example, and just a more notoriable position that he had in the American college football landscape, you may have thought that was an act. That wasn't an act. Folks like me who grew up in Georgia, we knew about him down at Valdosta State. He wasn't the head coach there. But a long time ago, back in the early to mid-90s, you see, if you're from where I'm from, they don't tell stories about Mike Leach at Texas Tech. They don't tell stories about Mike Leach at Washington State or Mississippi State. All due respect, that's when he gained his national notoriety. But down in West Central Georgia and South Georgia and rural Georgia period, they talk about that guy and his offensive marriage with Hal Mumme at Valdosta State in the early 90s. There was also a guy by the name of Dana Holgerson who wound his way through there once upon a time. They knew about his personality down there even then. Then he elevates, and he eventually becomes a high-profile coordinator and a high-profile head coach, and then a lot of other people knew about him. But there's a reason why, as you've listened to people talk about this man over the past 24 to 48 hours, some of whom knew him, some of whom had never met him in person before, everyone's got a story about him. Because that's kind of dude he was. Certainly left an impact on you if you ever got to meet him. So this past summer, we're in Atlanta doing SEC Media Days, and we had a one-on-one with him. We had some time alone with Mike Leach. So he comes in the room, and the thing about those sessions is they're only supposed to be 10 minutes, and it's a pretty tight schedule at SEC Media Days. You know, they go on the big stage. That's what you see on TV, but what you don't see is some of the networks, and we're included because we're CBS, we get the coaches to ourselves. And they just come in a room and they come to us. So they mic you and they sit you down. And, you know, if it's me interviewing a head coach, I know I got 10 minutes. So, you know, I know loosely where I want to go with the interview. There's no sense in even planning an interview with Mike Leach. No bullet points, no anything. He comes in and it's not an interview. It's more so just an experience. It may be suitable for air. You may not use any of it. We ended up using, I don't know, Jesse, Colin, what was it, like 2 or 3 minutes of what was supposed to be a 10-minute interview. Here's why. Some of you who have watched the show for a while know that I'm a pretty good kid. I follow the law, okay? I walk the straight and narrow, except there's this one thing I do in my free time. I kind of sometimes hop freight trains. It's just something I do. I believe I was born this way, you know, so I don't apologize for it. Well, suffice it to say, out of the 14 in the SEC, there was only one head coach I was really comfortable sharing that with. And that, of course, was Mike Leach. You've never seen eyes that big. until you've told that guy, yeah, I actually kind of live like a hobo. Because that lifestyle really would only be appealing to one SEC head coach, and I found him and I knew he was there. And so after we had gotten done with the quote-unquote football interview portion of SEC Media Days, yeah, I shared it with him. He had mentioned something that kind of sparked that, and he wouldn't leave. Can you imagine, by the way? I just want to tell you, a nice little side special would be SEC Media Days just following the sports information directors at Mississippi State trying to drag that guy, kicking and screaming out of one door and into another door. I don't know how long he put them behind the eight ball that afternoon just because of how much we held him up. But look, I kicked the snowball down the hill. Hey, I hop freight trains. And I just put my hands behind my back and I just listened the rest of the time because he ran with it. It was really fascinating. I wish we would have kept rolling the cameras. But you want to talk about impact on the sport of college football. I'm going to talk about the Hall of Fame in just a second. That's its own separate thing. I mean, I'm not going to pound the table about it, but I'm going to talk about the Hall of Fame in just a second. But impact is really incredible, the kind of impact this guy had. Mike Leach held the same little laminated play sheet from the day he broke in to his final game that he coached, which, by the way, was another Egg Bowl win. Congratulations to Mississippi State. Some of you know this story. All of you are about to know this story. He had Texas Tech rolling back in the mid to late 2000s. There was a time where they were number 2 in the country, and that famous game against Texas, I'll probably talk about that in a second too. But before that, when he was earlier on at Texas Tech, Lubbock, Texas is a special place. You know, I'm very hopeful that the new staff they have out there are able to bottle up just a fraction of what Mike Leach was able to bottle up there once upon a time, because it's a unique and special culture if you ever start winning out there, if you ever give the nation a reason to care about what's going on at Texas Tech. Well, Mike Leach gave him a reason. But here's the thing. Back in 2003, he's got a quarterback out there named Cliff Kingsbury. You went on to know him pretty well. He's currently the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. And so he's the starter, and I don't know what their depth situation was, but there was like a third-string quarterback out there, shoulder injury coming out of high school. It's becoming pretty obvious he's not going to be able to play. And so in lieu of cutting the kid, Mike Leach calls him into his office and says, hey, you got a really good football mind, probably the best football mind he had in his quarterback room. He just physically couldn't do the job. So he said, do you want to coach? Kid's never coached before. Obviously, he's like 19 years old. Do you want to coach? And so the kid's aggravated, storms out of the office, but comes back the next day and says, you know what? I'll take that coaching job. His name was Lincoln Riley. Yeah, so that turned out okay. There are a ton of stories about that, about guys who either rubbed up against Mike Leach or had access to him or crossed paths with him, played for him. Look at the lineage. That's a graphic that we didn't have time to make today. When you talk about the coaching tree, our Dennis Dodd referred to it more as a sequoia than just a tree. Incredible. You look at the offensive innovation. You look at guys out there who spend 25 hours a day in that offensive laboratory, and Mike Leach is out there with a mustard stain on a sweatshirt with a little play sheet he could fit in his back pocket and just running circles around you. Has to be disheartening, doesn't it? Has to be a little humiliating for some of the guys out there in our sport. I do want to talk about this Hall of Fame thing because it was brought to my attention today. When you watched Mike Leach, when you experienced him, you were watching a Hall of Famer. You're watching a college football Hall of Famer in real time. I never would have argued with that statement, ever. Personally, I was unaware of some of the criteria that are in place in order to access the Hall of Fame, either as a player or as a head coach. One of the rules that, frankly, I think should change and I think will change about access to the College Football Hall of Fame is you have to have a 60% winning percentage as a head coach. Leach is like 59.6, I think, so he's right below the threshold. A lot of people today were saying, we should just round up. No, you shouldn't round up. You shouldn't have the hard and fast winning percentage is what you shouldn't have. This is not professional football. This is college football. Having hard metrics as baseline requirements to access your Hall of Fame in a sport as unevenly built as college football is ludicrous. And I'm not going to pound the table hard about this tonight because, quite frankly, I think this will provide an impetus for that to change. I think some folks back in my home state would say Irk Russell from Georgia Southern should also have long since been a Hall of Famer, but this same number is what gets in the way. Look, you coach at Alabama, you better win 60% of your games. You coach at Texas, you coach at Ohio State, okay. Mike Leach didn't do that. Mike Leach coached at places historically where it's hard to win 50% of your games. And he was right there, right around the threshold to begin with. But what is a Hall of Fame? Like, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because, like I said, I think it'll get corrected. But if that guy doesn't qualify for your Hall of Fame, you got the wrong criteria in place for your Hall of Fame. So that's what I'll say about the College Football Hall of Fame and Mike Leach. They haven't made a statement on this today. I do think that this will be reason for them to change that rule. How could you not go back? Everybody's talking about their favorite memories today. I don't know if you've watched this sport any length of time. How can you not go back to 08? Just an amazing season. It was an amazing stretch right there at 07, 08, 09. It's when Urban Meyer and Florida are really peaking. Bob Stoops has got Oklahoma rolling. Saban's just come in the door down at Alabama. And it's sort of a transitioning point, I guess, nationally for the sport. And Mike Leach had Texas Tech rolling. And there was that fateful night out there in Lubbock. It feels like if you watch on TV, at least back then, it felt like the nights got a little darker in Lubbock than they did the rest of college football. That place got a little more menacing than the rest of college football. And they had Texas #1 in the country. Texas Tech was ranked top 10, and that's Graham Harrell and Michael Crabtree. No seconds left on the clock. I think they had 1 second left on the clock, and I think they won that thing like 39-33. Everybody remembers that. And if you don't, if we showed the replay, you would immediately remember it. Here's what I remember. This is in my infancy of a sports bettor, by the way. I remember thinking to myself, I got this Mike Leach guy figured out. They're about to party all week. Certainly this is the biggest win in a generation for this program. It's the biggest win of his head coaching career. Biggest win for anybody that season so far. They got top 10 Oklahoma State coming in next week. I am laying everything I have on Oklahoma State. They will go in there. They will pull the upset. They got smoked 56-20. Mike Leach just loaded the chambers again the very next week, and they drug Oklahoma State. So, yeah, you remember him beating Texas. They beat 2 top 10 teams in as many weeks, and it was Oklahoma, I think, that derailed them. They still finished a 2-loss team that year. Man, what a legend. It was a huge surprise the other night when we found out he was hospitalized. Since then, I think people had, as much as you can, prepared themselves for this news. I didn't want to talk about this Sunday night because I didn't have enough facts to talk about it. Certainly we understand how this turned out now. So I encourage you guys, we'll present this as a standalone video on the YouTube channel. Anybody who met Mike Leach, anybody, just who has memories, anything you want to say, that comment section will be open. But prayers to his family. I know the Mississippi State fan base is going through it. I know the players on that team and the administration are going through it. There's never the right time for things like this to happen. But I just wanted to lead off the show tonight talking about us losing a college football icon, Mike Leach.